you're speaking beautiful music to my ears. And for our listeners as well, trying to get into this space, I had a very funny screenshot of a gentleman who got 3 texts from his mother. The first text was, why did you have us invest in Ethereum? It was 3,000 when you told us to buy it. Now it's 1,000. See, this is why we don't love you. But there was an interesting article, about 2 weeks ago in terms of, how African Americans, you talk about inequalities and, the world doesn't move the way you thought, just pushing a button. There's a whole group of individuals who've never been able to participate in the financial world, in stocks and bonds, and group economics. And they've always been at the bottom of the total poll. So you have a lot of African Americans who are trying to get into this space. And we're usually the last to hear about something. And now we hit the crypto winter, as they're calling it. So kind of give us your take into, where we are now in terms of the markets with crypto.
Totally. And, one thing that I will note on your point is, you would think, and you would be correct, that like the tech sector is overrepresented in crypto, that there's a lot of people from Silicon Valley there. That is true. But, and I think this is surprising to some people, it certainly was surprising to me before I got into this space, minorities are also overrepresented, as are rural communities. And why is this, right? These are places that have not traditionally had equitable access to financial markets. These are places where it's been really hard to get real functional bank accounts, to get good brokerage accounts, to get, good access to systems. And all of a sudden, for the first time, you have this open network where, everyone can have the same level of access that, Citadel and Jane Street could have. And that is pretty revolutionary for a lot of people who haven't had that opportunity before. And so, that was something which I think it surprised me to learn. But the more time I've spent in this space, the more I've understood why that's true. Maybe one other thing on that, frankly, is this isn't even just a US thing, right? You look internationally at which places are overrepresented, and what you end up finding is, well, how about countries with dysfunctional financial systems, right? A lot of representation there because this is one of the first times that they can get real access, right? Ukraine is overrepresented in crypto right now because there are literally tanks outside their banks. Like they can't just, just use a bank to do what they want to do. They need some digital global financial access. So in terms of like, where do I see things right now? Because obviously we are in a bear market right now. The first thing that I think is worth noting is that this isn't a crypto specific bear market. Like we are in a bear market, that's certainly true. For crypto, Bitcoin is down like 65% or something like that from its peak. But if you look at the NASDAQ index, it's down, nearly 50% from its peak, right? It just, all asset classes are down a lot. And, the core trigger for this is just monetary policy changes. For a decade, the Fed had been, running basically really, soft money policies where it was, frankly, a lot of inflation, where there was, really, really low, often literally zero interest rates. And that caused a giant amount of money to enter the system and a giant appreciation in assets that were that you could invest in, and that was true of stocks. That's true of crypto. It's true of everything from wine to boats to houses. And we saw massive inflation in these asset classes over the last decade. Finally, this year, that started to trickle through to consumer goods. And that was really impactful because, among other things, first of all, it obviously just hit investors hard. But second of all, when you look at how we measure inflation, right? Traditionally, we look at CPI, and that's just looking at consumer prices. So CPI wasn't moving this whole time, even as all this money entered the world. So it was going through finance. As it trickles down, and then you have supply chain disruptions from COVID and from the war in Ukraine that sort of, dovetail with this. And all of a sudden, you have the makings of a huge increase in CPI inflation. The Fed picks this up and starts to dial up interest rates, dial down loans, and then a lot of money just rushes out of the system, and asset prices fall, crypto falls, stocks fall, everything falls. And that's where we are today. In this process, it is also worth noting that we also did see at the same time a fair bit of risk management philosophies play out, and some of them in a more healthy way than others. And there are a lot of margin calls. Some entities blew out pretty spectacularly, and that certainly exacerbated the fall a bit, right? Like if you look at the fall from like $25,000 to $20,000 per Bitcoin, a lot of that was margin calls. And so now, where does that leave us going forward? As far as I know, and I can't be 100% confident in this, but as far as I know, there aren't like more shoes to drop in terms of lots of companies blowing out here. Obviously, anything could happen, but things seem moderately stable as of today. And so going forward, I think that like a lot of what's going to happen is going to depend on just general economic factors, right? Like, what happens to the stock market, what happens to inflation, what happens to interest rates, what does the Fed do, what happens in Ukraine, like all of those things are going to matter, and they're going to flow through the economy more generally. And I think that's what's going to determine, where things go short term from here. Long term, obviously, what's going to matter the most is what actually happens in the ecosystem. Do people build great products, right? Like that ultimately is going to be what matters the most, even if it's on sometimes a fairly large lag from prices.